Hello, and welcome back to Full Time with Meg Linehan. I am Tamerra Griffin. I am joined by my co-host, Meg Linehan, and this week we are talking about what else other than NWSL playoffs. 8 teams, 4 can't-miss games. And we're kind of gauging the chaos quotient heading into this one. And to do that, we have enlisted the help of former player and broadcaster Lori Lindsey. Stick around for our conversation with her.
I mean, it does feel like we can't really start this episode without acknowledging the general mood of what's going on in this space. I think it is, we want to talk about the soccer with you all just because there are still big, important games. It is playoff time. But I think it's also, fair to acknowledge that everybody's mood this weekend is going to be very different than what I think a lot of people expected.
Absolutely. I mean, I had the urge to ask you how you're doing, Meg, as I typically do when we open the show. And on days like this, that question is big and heavy and layered and sometimes anxiety-inducing. And I think that women's sports generally, I believe, has always been inherently political. So it would be a disservice, it would be irresponsible for us as members of the media, as storytellers, as journalists, to ignore that fact. And that's why we have to acknowledge it, because this is so much bigger than soccer and will probably end up affecting women's soccer, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of amongst many other first thoughts as last night or as Tuesday night turned into Wednesday of just, I think we can't even know yet how this is going to impact the NWSL or women's sports in general. Long-term, women's sports have been a conversation in this election and usually not in a good faith sort of way. And so I think there is this sense of there will be impacts. We don't know what that will look like, but obviously there are teams and markets that I think are already having those conversations. The CBA has maybe opened up players to have a little more power about where they play. And so I think we are going to see impact. It's way too early yet to know exactly what that will look like. And obviously we will be talking about this, I'm sure, as everything happens and unfolds. But right now I think, there are playoffs to talk about. But again, acknowledging all of everything that is happening is important to do off the top of the show, and just saying that, this is a community and not a perfect community by any stretch, but that I think there will be some comfort for folks moving into this weekend, having some games and being able to hang out with people that are their community.
Right, in person and virtually. I've been thinking a lot about the importance of both and being able to hold multiple truths, how sometimes distractions can be healthy and needed, and sports have always been that for so many people. But also recognizing that if you are someone who is feeling scared, angry, anxious, even if you're not able to fully articulate your feelings, it is okay to do what you need to do to feel okay. This is not an unfamiliar time, but it is nonetheless troubling for a lot of communities. And all we can do sometimes is just put one foot in front of the other. And when we look ahead to this weekend, there's a lot still to look forward to.
100%. So that's why we've got Lori joining us today. All right, we are joined by Lori Lindsey, who has been a commentator in the NWSL with Amazon Prime Video, who is just like a true OG of women's soccer. Lori, first, I do want to start us off with just this is the first year of the media deal in this new era of the NWSL. What has the Prime Video experience been like for you?
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Really. I mean, as you were saying, this is the first year Amazon, right? We have multiple different partnerships, television partnerships. So I think one that's been exciting for the league, but to be involved with Amazon, to have them as one of the partners, been from a personal standpoint, I think in terms of just what they brought to the league has been just outstanding, right? And first and foremost, just to give a little bit of context on why I feel that way is because one, it's been a Friday night game, right? Which we historically haven't had consistently. So I think that's been fun for viewers because you have very little, I think, conflict with many other games in our league, but also it just opens up another night for viewers to be able to watch, pay attention to the games. Also, they've brought in like all of their own producers, all of their own behind the scenes people, which has been extremely wonderful. It's very like family like atmosphere. And also, just for like listeners don't understand what that means, when you have a team behind the scenes that continuously is the same, then you just build the rapport, right? Of like how to work with one another, replays that you're given, because there's so much stuff that's happening in game that a lot of people don't know of, and rightfully so. Why would you? But that whole just atmosphere of it being family-like has just been tremendous. And also, I think most importantly, all the games have been on site. And so what that does is that builds rapport with teams, that builds rapport with the players, and the driving force, in my opinion, for Amazon, and I believe that they would say this as well, is they're very into storytelling, right? They have TNF, Thursday Night Football, and a lot of that is driven by that. So they had a year under their belt with TNF, and very much treat the NWSL in the same way in terms of like, okay, we want to build up the stories, we want to build up the players and who they are, and allow the viewer a really in-depth understanding of the excellence of these players and who they are, not just on the field, off the field. So again, I can't overstate how wonderful has been just the building of the relationship personally, but also just the access that we've had to all of the different teams. So just an outstanding first season.
It's been such a seamless transition too. Like the stories have always been there. The teams have been ready to be covered in this sort of way. And it's been pretty remarkable to see from the outside. So appreciate that behind the scenes take. Before we get into the specific games in this quarterfinal, Lori, let's look at the big picture, because I think one of the prevailing narratives that we're already getting as we head into NWSL playoffs has been about the parity, the shift in parity. And I've personally been a little bit surprised to see the predictions and opinions of people who I otherwise like totally respect, totally lacking any sense of chaos. Like, we did not forget that we're talking about the NWSL, right? Yeah. So my question to you is, do you think that there's going to be any upsets in these quarterfinals? And how have you sort of been like observing and processing this difference in parity that we've seen from last season? And I guess to what extent do you think that the NWSL can still market itself as like the most competitive league, in the world where no game is guaranteed? Do you see that carrying into the playoffs, or do you think this is going to mark a shift?
Yeah, I think this is something, I love this question. It's something I've thought about quite a bit throughout the season, when we kind of realized that the parity wasn't last year was unprecedented in terms of decision day. I had the Angel City versus Portland game where Portland had to win to win the Shield. They didn't, right? Angel City upset them, and then San Diego went on. So, just one of my most favorite days in the history of the NWSL last year. So disappointing that we weren't able to have a decision day, one, and then two, it hasn't played out exactly like that, right? I also, second thought here is I also wonder if people aren't predicting chaos because it's not too many games after dark. There's only the Friday night game. That's like, after dark starts to get really weird. Tradition. Everything else is like midday or early afternoon. Yeah. So I feel like let's just normalize things here.
Brunch ball.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. That's exactly. We're going to have like mimosas out and stuff. It's going to be way friendlier here. I'm not predicting a lot of chaos either, and here's why. Because I think the thing that I love is, one, yes, there hasn't been as much parity this year, but I've loved in general just the other storylines that have come out, right? Obviously, there's some big names that are retiring, right? But we had Orlando and their unprecedented run. I feel like Marta being like revitalized within that, and obviously I think we can't celebrate her enough and what she's done for the game. So to continue to be on this ride with her is wonderful. Shawinga, Banda, right? They've changed, to me, just the complexity of this league. Those two alone, right? Every week tuning in to see what's going to happen. It's just been phenomenal. So I actually don't think of like there not being as much parity this year as a negative. I think there's always going to be storylines, and I think the shifts will come and go throughout the years, and it will be interesting with a new CBA what that looks like. I think salary cap will always allow for some sort of parity, but also I think, okay, buckle up everybody. These certain organizations, you have to step up, show what you're going to do, right? That's a whole nother conversation, but it is all wrapped in within all of this. But in terms of these quarterfinals specifically and just the playoffs in general, listen, the one that I'm kind of thinking, and it's just been like, I don't know why I think this. I just feel like it's Bay is on this ride. I think this could be an upset over Washington, and that's the one upset I'm going with. I said it the other day on Heather Riley and I's SiriusXM show that we do, and I was just like, I think it's going to be that, and partially because I think one, and again we'll get into the specific matchup, so I'll just be kind of general here, but Orlando I think is pissed. And I think they have a chip on their shoulder because everyone's like, oh, you lost 2 games, right? Like, what's happening here, right? Or you allowed Seattle to score 2 goals on you last weekend. And then I think Kansas City realized, like, we can't be winning championships winning 5-4, right? And they've cleaned up their act defensively. I think that, and considering that they could have home field advantage all the way through, is like a whole nother storyline there. And then Gotham, I think they've been so stingy defensively, but now are scoring goals. But I think that is the overarching theme in this, is that like there are going to be fine margins, so you have to be able to defend like your life depends on it, and you have to have enough experience to be able to like, we're not going to get rattled if something happens. And you know, I kind of continue to look to Andy Sullivan going down with her ACL. And I think she's a cornerstone to that Washington team that would hold them together. Despite that they have 3 wins without her since her going down injured.
Playoffs are different,
I know. And she does so many like little like intangible things that like that a lot of people, if you're just going to games, you wouldn't recognize. But I think she would have been a difference. And I think Bay is like, here we go. We're on a new path. Like we have found new momentum in this season, so that's my one upset. All
right, so let's put a pin in the big picture for now and get into some of these specific matchups. But we'll start with the Friday night game on Amazon Prime Video. Orlando, Chicago, probably not the matchup a lot of people were expecting for Orlando as well, right? Like that was kind of the one intrigue of final weekend, is figuring out placement of 6, 7, 8. So Orlando gets Chicago. What are you... I mean, I know you just said Orlando's pissed. Orlando also has home advantage, which is going to be very interesting, I think, to see play out, just because what is that attendance number going to be? Like, there's a whole bunch of factors here. So what are you looking for out of this game right now?
Yeah, well, I'm looking, how you get Banda even more involved, right? I mean, she's always active. So I'm not as concerned for like a Barbara Banda to be scoring as I think some people are saying, like, okay, you need Banda to be scoring towards these crucial games and playoffs. But I think that she draws so much attention. It's just about other players making sure that they're finding the back of the net. But I think McCutcheon in the midfield, to me, to have her back consistently, or at least playing important minutes, I think in a lot of ways is a player like an Annie Sullivan that allows that front line to take way more, or at least the front 4 to take more risks. And even though they've gotten results without her when she was out injured for a period of time there, I think that is going to be huge down the stretch to have her as like a cornerstone in the midfield. But mostly I just am like, I think they've got to go in, play with confidence, know they're playing for a little bit more, and use that chip on their shoulder. Because I think this is a Chicago team that did enough at the beginning of the season, and that's why they're in. Because let's be honest, I think it's 3 wins in the last 10 games since, right? It's not impressive.
It's been rough.
It's
been rough.
100%.
And it doesn't help that Ludmila is out. Mal Swanson's been on a bit of a scoring drought.
Yeah, 100%. All of those things. So I think it's just really for Orlando. First. We're all going to say this, but it's so true in the playoffs, right? First 15 minutes, somebody's got to put a crunching tackle in. Somebody's got to do something that's going to set the tone for your team. And that will be true because regardless if there's going to be upsets, the margins in this league are fine, right? And I still 100% believe that we can call this the most competitive league because from top to bottom, there could be, even if we're not predicting them, there's always an opportunity for upsets, right? So I think for Orlando, though, in this game, it really is just, you've got enough experience. I still even know, like, I feel like they're consistently playing for something more with Marta, right? To get her first championship. And I'm like, you ride that wave, right?
Yeah,
ride that
100%.
wave. So, yeah.
I mean, I think it is interesting, too, in terms of, thinking about each team, like, how they started in the season and like how they finish the season, because to your point, Chicago does a lot in the beginning of that season. I think outperformed everybody's expectations very early on, and then have come back from the Olympic break and underwhelmed, whereas yes, Orlando had that stumble of 2 whole losses.
Exactly.
And
What is
that
this?
did, like, it became such a strange talking point of just like, but also you think about how many people they rested in Portland for that first loss, right?
Yeah.
And them trying to, I think, realize like, okay, Marta should maybe take a nap for a night. Like,
Yeah.
she won't stop herself, so we've got to stop her. I mean, do you think that can be a factor in these series of just like that recent form kind of impacting the way that these quarterfinals play out?
For sure. I absolutely think so. Because I think, it goes to the fine margins again, but a lot of that is confidence, right? Going in and just a belief deep down. And so, yeah, I do think so. I think that Chicago is going to feel the effects of not having great performances, only 3-10. And again, to your point, not having Mallory Swanson in great form. They've relied a lot on her, right? So, yeah, and obviously Staub being out earlier in the year,
Yeah.
how much has that
Yeah.
impacted, and them rotating players? So, yeah, there's been a lot there. And that's why I just say for Orlando, it does feel like it's just like about like true to what you're doing,
Yeah.
right? You got an important win against Seattle. Fine if you're getting some goals scored on you. In fact, I think better in the regular season, and then just regroup, right? And there's enough in that group. Again, I really like the roster balance of that team. And so, yeah, I don't think that there's an upset there if Orlando shows up.
All right, Lori, let's move on to Kansas City Current and North Carolina Courage.
Yeah.
In this matchup, I'm looking at a team that has, of course, been at the top of the table all season in the Current, have shown that they can score, setting aside the exceptional Tamerra,
Yeah.
several different ways. All players are hungry to score. They've set so many records in that way against a team that likes to, kill death by 1,000 passes. North Carolina is going to want to hold on to the ball as much as possible. They had a bit of a shaky end to their season, but they were also one that I'd sort of pinpointed 2/3 of the way in as a team that seemed like they were peaking at the right time, which is, of course, another huge factor when you're talking about playoffs. So given that and other things that you may have seen, how do you see this one going, or what do you think is going to be important to look at?
Yeah, well, I'm thrilled about this matchup because just from the stylistic standpoint, right? Because
Yeah.
to your point, you can have a Kansas City team that can score in multiple ways, right? They're not a team that really wants possession, but they can keep possession. And we've seen that especially at home. But then obviously hitting on the break they can be so deadly, whether it's Dabinia, whether it's Shawinga, whoever's playing really. I mean, they've consistent, 18 different goal scorers. So it is
Yeah.
outstanding, just like the production that they've had. I think Vanessa DiBernardo, Lola Bonta in the midfield, Claire Hutton as an 18-year-old, right? I mean, just dynamite. Like, you can't say enough about that group. And I think also probably don't get enough praise for what they've done to kind of hold the team together in terms of like what they look like from the start of the season to the end. So I think one, there's that and the home field advantage. But then again, as you mentioned, this is a North Carolina team that wants to keep possession. And I think what's so interesting about this is I would imagine Kansas City's going to be like, yep, have possession. Open up the space for us, and we are going to fight for our lives to win the ball and then send Shawinga, send Dabinia, right? And we saw it in a couple games ago in San Diego. I was on that call with CBS, and it was it was the last regular season home game for Kansas City. And same thing, pick the ball off, Dabinia's off and running. And Dabinia's coming off the bench, right? I mean, this is a world-class player that you're bringing off the bench, so you have a variety. I do love the way that North Carolina plays, though, and I think that they have different threats, right? They also have some different threats than they had at the beginning of the year because it's very different. So, but I would imagine that this is how how it's gonna play out. Is Kansas City's gonna allow them to have possession. North Carolina's going to have to be very mindful of what their shape behind the ball looks like when they are in possession, and just make sure that they stall any of those threats. But more importantly, I feel like what gets everybody is freaking set pieces. Just make sure that you have the right, like corner kicks. I can't tell you how many times Shawinga's just picked up the ball and like gone on a 80-yard run, right? And everyone's
Yeah.
like, oh, set pieces, we forgot about that. So I'm like, what? So I'm going to be curious. But I do think in playoffs, home field advantage is going to be huge, specifically for, again, Kansas City, who's going to be like, yep, we want to be in that final.
Oh, yeah.
One game at a time. And every single time I've been at that stadium, it feels like that team is consistently in a playoff game. It feels like they treat every game like a playoff. Like they're pissed when they get scored on now. That was different than the beginning of the year. And I think that's going to be a difference maker for this team.
Can we talk about Vlatko real quick? Just him coming back into this league and what you've seen from him with Kansas City?
I'll tell you, the guy's a jokester. I can't even believe it. Like, he is lighthearted. He's having the time of his life. It feels like the weight of the world is off his shoulders. I think the ability to, and we've all known this, right? This has been a dialogue around U.S. women's national team, women's soccer in general here in the States. But like, he likes being day-to-day with the players, right? He likes to get that message across. I think he loves being day-to-day with his coaching staff and gives a lot of his staff freedom to work with players. I think the dialogue between him and his team seems to be wonderful. There just seems to be like a seriousness, but like a lightheartedness within it. I mean, it also helps when you have Lola Bonta as one of your captain, right? I mean, the energy she's bringing. But then also I'm telling you, this is going to be I love talking about this topic, but again, it's for another podcast. The makeup of rosters is so crucial in this league. You have to have experience. You have to have players that understand what it takes to win championships. The age is vital as well. If you have a huge age gap, I feel like in terms of players that have been there for a long time and then these young, it doesn't work in this league. Mm-hmm. And I feel like Orlando and Kansas City really have that makeup, like the players that have little taste in the national team, but maybe have a chip on their shoulder because they deserve to have had more time with the national team, but don't, and understand what it takes to win in this league. I feel like Kansas City for sure has that, and I think that can really push teams on in this league.
They've also shown an ability to adjust. I mean, bringing on Alana Cook during that transfer window was huge for them, and I know you mentioned them tightening up that defense. She's been so instrumental in that, and I think having that ability to adjust is another one of those sort of intangibles that can pay dividends once you reach playoffs.
Completely agree.
So I am a Northern California Bay Area native. We've spoken a bit about this Washington Spirit Bay FC game in Washington, D.C. Lori, you've already shared that you think this might be, if we're to see any sort of upset, it might be here. Revisiting the point I just made about peaking at the right time, to me, it seems like Bay has managed to do that. They've also made some major adjustments to their defense, bringing on Abby Dahlkemper, who has been such a breath of fresh air. The Spirit, they've been dealing with some key injuries and are a little bit more vulnerable than I'm sure they wanted to be heading into the playoffs. So can you unpack how you see this potential upset happening and sort of what the Spirit might need to do to prevent that?
Yeah, I think, momentum, as we mentioned, is a huge, just being able to have confidence coming into these playoff games is massive. And to your point, Abby Dahlkemper, I feel like, in a way, single-handedly has helped, course correct the season for Bay, right? She's locked down the defense. I think her vocal leadership, her experience in general, the energy she brings. I mean, she's doing post game, getting on the mic and stuff, right? Her and Caprice,
her and Caprice getting reunited. I think that's such a good, interesting connection that you can lean on that's pre-existing. That is one of those chemistry things that can impact the rest of a team without planning for it.
100%. And I think the biggest thing that I think probably Abby Dahlkemper has brought to this team, because I haven't called it one of their games for a while, but one of the kind of talking points around is they needed more veteran leadership, right? Yeah. Vocal leaders, because they had all the experience and talent, but it was just they needed somebody that was going to be bringing that out in terms of vocally, and Abby has seemed to have done that, right? And just that little change, this team is just soaring at this point in time. And also, I just think sometimes you just need that, right? You just need to be we're going to be the ones that are going to go in here and upset. And I just feel like I've loved this Washington team, and I felt like they were kind of flying under the radar for a while, and it was just everyone was talking about Kansas City, especially in Orlando early on. I'm this team is silently coming along and just going to continue. But since Croy, right? I mean, she was a difference maker. Santos, to her credit, had come in, but then she's gotten injured. I think it was the quad injury, right? And so she's gaining some minutes back. But there's just feels to me there's just been too many injuries that I feel like are going to take a toll when it comes to the playoffs at this point in time. And obviously I mentioned Andy Sullivan, just such goes about her business, does things, and this team is suited the way. This is the best I felt like I've seen Andy Sullivan play since her previous ACL, and her and I had even had a conversation. I was like, I thought she was going to make a run with the national team, so my heart goes out to her in terms of this injury because I think she's been lights out this season. But I think losing somebody of that quality at this point in time in the season, even though they've gotten the win since, it is a different season. It's just a different ball game, and I wonder if that importance, that player and the importance that she's been to Washington will have just enough of an impact that it'll sway to Bay's advantage.
Yeah, I think.
Plus the last thing I was going to say is different from Chicago, where they played Sunday and have to turn around and go to Orlando and play Friday. You have Bay, who played Sunday, but they don't play till the following Sunday, so they get a full week. They can travel, they can settle in, and they can get adjusted if they want to the time change. Because I also think that is something that's not going to be talked about. But the start time on Saturday for the Kansas City North Carolina game being 11 a.m. Central Time. That's going to be interesting, even though a lot of teams probably train around that time. And then the earlier game, what is it, a 12:30 Eastern game, I think, for Washington and Bay. So that's essentially a 9:30, right? So they can get adjusted. I think all those little details do matter.
Yeah, super. I mean, I think that might be the one that a lot of people are circling. But I do think the final matchup that we've got, Gotham and Portland, is also one that is full of potential of... I'm hoping for nonsense. I'm actually going to go to this game now.
I like the word nonsense.
I mean, it is like, it's going to be a fun one just because I think it is a rematch, right, of 2023 and that journey for Gotham of the 6th seed running all the way to the championship and having to go through Portland in the semifinal. That game was full of drama. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of narratives on this side too, but to your point, Gotham are really, this was the super team heading into this season. Do you think it's played out that way right now?
I think we're starting to see it play out, right? And some of it comes to a little bit more consistency, just I think more so than we ever have seen with under Juan Carlos Amoros's lineups, because typically it's like, I don't even know who's going to be on that starting lineup, right? And then now I think it seems to have like leveled out a bit. Here's what I'll say though, is Portland, we were saying this last Friday on the Amazon, they look so different when they have Sophia Smith. Game changer, right? Sophia Smith and Hina Sugita.
For
those
me
two
is
players,
the one where I was like, oh, different team now.
Completely different team. And very much like in a different way, and not comparing these two, but Hina Sugita and Andy Sullivan, not the same player at all, but those two players doing things that not everybody, if you're just watching a game, will notice, but it's such an important aspect that it just allows everybody, the other 10 players, to just take more risks, play more freely, because those players are always going to be in positions to like pick up scraps or do what they need to do to help the team keep ticking. And then obviously Sophia Smith, I mean, just goodness gracious, like bow down, because she's just finishing chances that not many people in this world are finishing and doesn't need a lot of chances. And the one thing I'll say is I was on this previous matchup almost right after I think it was actually might have been the first or second game after the Olympics, and neither Sophia Smith, Sam Coffey played in that game. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious why I think Gotham are like hitting another level, and they've been in these pressurized situations last year and they'll be familiar with it. They haven't faced this Portland team with those two players. Yep. And I think that changes the complexity of this game greatly, and also very much feel like an Allie Krieger type situation where you're playing for something more. You're like, we're in the playoffs, we took care of that business. My main concern about this and why I haven't had this as like a pinpoint upset is because I would have thought Portland beating Orlando 2 games before the international break would have set them on that trajectory. Then they turn around and lose the next game. There just feels like one win out of 9 going into last weekend's game against Angel City. It's just been so wildly inconsistent. Yeah. Granted, some of it has been the injuries, right, and then battling the CONCACAF Cup and stuff. But I'm just like, at some point in time, it just feels a little bit like, it's just been too inconsistent for you to be putting like playoff winning performances together consistently. But listen, we've seen weirder things, so like, who knows? Who knows? Yeah. But those two players being back are important.
Yeah, I do think that's probably a good spot for us to launch into some of these intangibles, because I think to your point, right, like, who's got the Allie Krieger narrative this year? Mm-hmm. And I thought it was going to be Marta with Orlando, and I still very much think that is a factor. But now with Christine Sinclair. We got that last game. I mean, Sophia Smith straight up having to be told, like, I'm not dying, right? Like, those are
So
big
good.
emotions. And it is both a momentum boost, but I think it's also sometimes really hard to play with them at the same time. So how does a team like Portland harness that effectively and not let it overwhelm or stress them out?
Well, that was a question that we had going into that Angel City game, right? Is
Yeah.
like, can you play to the level that you need to play to get yourself into playoffs and make sure you secure, but also not play to the occasion, which is going to be like so emotionally draining and like everything leading up. So I actually think it's kind of a positive because Sync now has done those interviews, right? So like all of like kind of the activity around it or chaos around it is out of the way, and they use that to their advantage to, I mean, start wonderfully, put that game to bed in the first 45 minutes, right? So I think now you just use that as a springboard. The tough part is traveling in this league we know is challenging, so they're traveling cross country, but I think it's exactly that, just harnessing that. And like harnessing, we got ourselves in the playoff. I think Sam Coffey looked good. The fact that she played coming off of right into from international break and playing the game that she did, everybody's just got to come together. But that's my worry, is that it's just been too inconsistent.
Yeah, and just sort of related to that, I'm thinking also about playoff experience generally, because being able to hold multiple, sometimes conflicting emotions or emotions that don't necessarily play well together is something that you have to be able to harness going into these knockout game scenarios. And so I'm looking at teams like Bay, who are making it obviously to the playoffs for the first time, and even Orlando to an extent, historically, right, not their first playoff appearance, but it's been a minute. To what extent do you think that might play a role? Because these games are going to feel emotionally very, very different, even before you bring in, those bigger aspects that people might be playing toward.
Yeah, I think I love this question, because I do feel like that's where Orlando, a team like them, who's been stingy the entire season defensively, right, for the most part, that comes into play, because typically it's very cagey games, right? No one really wants to take a lot of risks. So I think it's who's willing to do that. And that's where I feel like even if like an Orlando, that organization specifically hasn't been in the playoffs, or is not familiar with that, right? You still have like Marta, you still have Morgan Gautrat, you still have Emily Sams now that has like experience, right? Adriana, you have Banda. These players have been in pressurized situations that they'll understand what that feels like. And so those players that are going to have to step up, right? And very much a Portland as well. You've got Becky Sauerbrunn, Hina Sagita, you've got Sink, Sophia Smith, right down the spine of that team. So you've got to harness that, because it's going to be about kind of like, hey, if you concede early, let's not panic. We have plenty of time. You just need one chance to put it away, right? But again, that's much easier, me sitting here chatting with you, saying that, because I've been in those situations where you're just like, oh God, this isn't going to work. What are we going to do, right? And then everybody starts panicking, and then it's bananas out there. So it really is about like being able to manage those emotions, and even it's just one or two leaders, right, that have been in those situations, is like, we're calming down. That's why I feel like an Abby Dahlkemper coming on board is no doubt relaying that message some way, in terms of just the feeling she's giving people on the field, connecting passes or whatever. And that's why I say it's going to be so important for the first tackle, just connecting your first pass, whatever it is, getting on the front foot. If you're just going to be like, we're just going to kind of attack and press, because that's going to release some of the energy, and then we can. But yeah, I imagine most of the games, these games are going to be cagey, and it's going to be about players just, relaying the message. Chill, we've got this, right? And that's why I think also the Gotham one is interesting, because across the board, you look at that team, I think everybody's been in that situation. Right. So it's like, okay.
Yeah,
good
if
job.
nothing else, the end of the 2023 championship for a lot of those players after Mandy Hawk got red carded.
Yeah,
is like
another goal. Yeah, exactly.
We can just end this game with our original goalkeeper intact. It's
totally.
It's unlocked.
Totally.
Yeah.
All right, Lori, we know that we got to let you go, but real quick before we do, I think one of the things that we're also thinking about, like just to even skip ahead a week, the fact that the way that the bracket works out, where we're going to get Orlando Casey as a potential semifinal matchup, where it feels like emotionally that is a final. That's a championship matchup. How are you feeling about that one?
Oh, I'm feeling like I'm hoping I'm on that call. I'm hoping I'm on that semifinal game. Because obviously, like, yeah, actually that would be played in Orlando, wouldn't it?
Yep.
Because they'd have,
they've
so
got the
that
higher
changes.
seating, yeah.
So that changes. I was just thinking, like, how it works out. Yeah. I'm honestly, it's like what I feel like about all of these games. Really, towards the end, is just like how lucky are we to be witnessing the quality of player, right? Individually is just I feel lucky just watching these players live, and also I think in that game in particular, it's just who can take their chances. As cliche as it sounds, it's like who can show up, minimize the mistakes, but also within that context, play freely and have fun with it, because there are going to be a lot of people that are going to be like, okay, I want to have fun, but I'm also like, this feels like such intense moments. I don't want to mess up. And it's really just about, like, that's what I always say about getting the first tackle, because then it's just like, it's like taking
Valve
a big
release.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
100%. And it's just like, okay, this is actually just soccer. This is what we're here for. These are the game. This is what we've played all these other games for. But again, that's so much easier said than done. So it's going to be in that moment who can. I expect that one to be pretty cagey though, because we had Amazon. We had that call and we were so excited. And then both teams were like, "Sorry about you,"
Right.
like, "Sorry that we just," because no one wanted to take any risk. And I'm like, "Come on, let's see some chaos." So hopefully that game will be played at like midnight, and then it certainly will be chaos.
I know we need some sort of boost from this daylight savings.
Totally.
To bring some spiritual darkness if there's not actual natural darkness. I like to think that the fact that we've already seen things like Rachel Kunananji standing on the ball and beckoning Paige Nielsen before we even got to the playoffs is hopefully going to usher us into various degrees of chaos, even if it doesn't quite result in an upset, even though I'm hoping for that for sure. But Lori, we really appreciate your expertise, giving us a sense of what the broadcast experience has been like watching and calling these games in a season like this. And we'll definitely be eager for your thoughts once we get kicked off officially with the playoffs. So thank you again so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Nobody else I'd rather be talking about the NWSL with, so thank you.
Thanks, Lori.
All right. So just in case you don't have these games marked on your calendar, here is a quick refresher for the NWSL quarterfinal playoffs that kick off this weekend. Starting November 8th, we have the first ranked Orlando Pride against the Chicago Red Stars. That game will be in Orlando, streaming on Prime at 8 p.m. Eastern. Next day, Kansas City Current and the North Carolina Courage at 12 Eastern. West Coast people, be sure to set your alarms. That's going to be on CBS and Paramount Plus. November 10th, Washington Spirit and Bay FC. Another fairly early one for West Coast folks, 12:30 Eastern. That one's going to be on ABC. And then to round us out, Gotham FC against the Portland Thorns on November 10th, also, but a little bit later at 3 Eastern, also on ABC. Mouthful, but we've had more screens open at once across the weekend, so I know that you guys can handle it.
Oh, this is totally doable. Also, just like Sunday, you're just going to be sitting in front. It's a doubleheader. It's going to be great.
Exactly. Brunch ball, like we mentioned with Lori. Yep. Now, I know this is definitely the time of season where people like to indulge in their predictions. That is tired. Wired is the NWSL playoff bingo card that we created for you guys and are so excited to share. I was talking about online communities and IRL communities in the women's soccer world, and I think that this is a great way for us to all participate and celebrate the chaos that we hope to maybe manifest for these playoffs.
Yeah, I think we're manifesting chaos real bad with this bingo card.
This is the only way we know in this league. So, Meg, we have all, including with our producer Theo Lloyd Hughes, added our own chaos wish list items to this bingo card. Which ones are standing out to you? Also, just to give people a sense of what this card is looking like.
I will say, I think it was you, Tamerra, who wrote in Becky Sauerbrunn goal, and I immediately, like, we were still on our meeting, and I gasped,
I love a defender
and I was
goal.
like, yes. It's perfect.
Now or
also,
never.
My first write-in in sort of our miscellaneous category was CPKC River goal, because I think we are all manifesting that 100%. So, like, those are maybe the reaches in this. But that's fine. Like, some of these are going to be reaches. I don't think anybody's going to get a blackout bingo card. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, maybe if playoffs were twice as long. Maybe if we'd started this at the beginning of the season. But again, this is playoffs, whole different game, whole different environment. So stay tuned for when we start sharing this bingo card on our socials. And if you aren't already following us, now is your urgent reminder, because I don't want you guys to miss out on this game. At TA Full-Time to follow along, both with the playoffs and everything else that we've been discussing across women's soccer. If you're not subscribed yet to our newsletter, make sure you're doing that. theathletic.com/fulltime. It is free. And of course, always stay tuned to the stories that are coming out of The Athletic, because we are going to have you covered for this playoffs and beyond. Buckle up. Buckle up.
Tamerra, what one do you most want to mark off the bingo card?
I have to go with, and I'm not sure who added this one, but Alyssa Nair getting a hug was excellent.
It was not me, so it must have been Theo.
That's definitely been like the theme of the year for her. Love that for her. Close second, though, I feel like Lola Bonta has been like in the studio with, choreographers working on specific playoff goal celebrations. And she seems like someone who's going to take it to the next level. So
100%.
I love a good dance move. Those are my two.
All right. Sounds good. Well, I mean, now the expectations have been set.
The manifestations have been
We got to
made.
see some of these things.
Hopefully the snack grocery list is prepped, because you cannot have a good playoff game without a good snack. I'd love to hear what you guys are eating as you get ready for these games. Thank you, as always, for listening. I'm Tamerra Griffin. I'm alongside Meg Linehan, and you've been listening to Full Time with Meg Linehan. You can catch me somewhere in the world taking deep breaths and just trying to put one foot in front of the other on Twitter and Instagram.
100%. All right, I'll probably see some of you at this Gotham game this weekend. Also, just as a little homework for next week's episode, obviously we'll be with you on Monday for the full-time review for all of that quarterfinal action. But we're also all going to be sitting down to watch the Spain documentary for their World Cup win / the Kiss incident that's on Netflix. So homework there. And then, of course, it's also award season in the NWSL. So I'm sure that will be coming up next week. Let us know if you've got any thoughts there. You can always email us at fulltime@theathletic.com.
And just in case you can't wait until next Thursday as we recap these quarterfinals, make sure you're also listening to Full Time Review, which comes out every Monday. We will certainly have a lot to say after this weekend. Full Time does not happen without producer Theo Lloyd Hughes, video producer Leah Griffin, and executive producer Emily Olson. Thanks as always for listening, and we will see you soon.